This is the Lew Rockwell Show.
Well, it's great to have as our guest this morning Mr. Gerald Celente. Gerald is the founder and director of the Trends Research Institute, publishes the Trends Journal. Take a look at trendsresearch.com.
Buongiorno, how are you?
Good morning, sir. Well, you've had some interesting experiences since we last talked in Chile, and you were magnificent down there.
Yeah, well, it's all that, it's almost, 25 years of close combat training. And I had my own school for a while.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I had it up until I was about 52, and I ripped my cruciate ligament.
Mm.
And when you have your own school, you have every jerk walking in that wants to rip you apart. So you have to be at the top of your game. And I said, I'm getting too old for this. So I just packed it in because they told me that the operation would be, it'd be huge and it wouldn't really, it was too risky. So yeah, it was all those years of training, and I really attribute the close combat. I consider that the glue of my career. It put everything together in the sense that it eliminates fear. So I say what I want to say. I'm not going to be intimidated by anybody because, hey, look, if you want it to turn ugly, you could really do that too, So I have that attitude because, I'll fight for my life. And that's what it really does for you.
Well, the way you got out of that hotel after the horrendous earthquake, which of course got very little publicity in this country, far more serious earthquake than, say, the Haitian earthquake, how you got out of that hotel and how you got out of Chile, how you were able to very quickly save yourself and you had an associate with you. Really, it was a model of what you advocate for all of us in terms of the money situation, what the government has done to protect the big boys, but of course they're doing terrible things to the average person. And you've been the tribune of the average American, of the working guy, and in this horrible situation. So, Gerald, what is ahead? And again, what should the people listening to this broadcast, what should they do to try to protect themselves?
Well, as you mentioned, it's neo-survivalism. And what got us out of Chile so quick was our close combat network. Chile has great wireless service, and the word went out, the global SOS, 2 black belts trapped in Chile. And all of a sudden, we started getting to high-level contacts at the embassy, to directions and contacts on how to get out of there as the airport was destroyed. And it's the same thing now. People have to join together with like-minded people, number one. The worst is going to happen. We just heard George Soros saying that Act 2 of the financial crisis is about to happen. Well, Act 1 hasn't ended. This is a continuing act. And it's time for survival strategies. And I'm, of course, I don't give investment advice, only what I do for myself. I believe in buying gold. I have 80% of my assets in it. I used to be half in euros and half in dollars just to hedge myself, so that if one goes down, the other goes up, and I'm even. That's all I want. But now I'm in Canadian dollars and U.S. dollars because the euro, maybe it's just too risky to even trade it anymore at some point. And it's really not spending anything that you can't afford to spend. If you don't have the money, don't go into debt. People ask me, should I borrow money to buy gold? Absolutely not. I wouldn't borrow money to do anything, not even to build my business. I build my business on the money that we make, and I invest in myself. And I wouldn't invest in any equity market at all. It's gambling. Investing is gambling. And to me, the gold is my wild card. That's my gamble. And the realities are that we see ourselves moving closer to a world war. And there's no way out because the United States keeps escalating it in Pakistan. They're escalating it in Afghanistan. And they're losing wars. People better grow up and understand this. Iraq is a losing war. Afghanistan's a losing war. There is no victory. Anything the government touches, whether it's war, whether it's healthcare, whether it's the war on drugs, whether it's Katrina, whether it's the Gulf of Mexico oil disaster, whether it's education, you name it, they touch it, it turns into a losing situation. So you can't follow your leader. You have to lead yourself. Think for yourself.
Gerald, you said that the UK may be the next to default.
Yes, you look at their GDP, budget deficit to GDP ratio, it's right up there near Greece's. And by the way, what we're also seeing, Lou, and people, they mistake things when I say things. They say that, this is what I advocate, or this is what I like, or this is what I'm for. And I'm not saying that at all. We only give the forecast. And one of the forecasts when we talk about the UK is bringing together the bigger picture. The people they use these fancy words like sovereign default on debt. How about paying off banks that made bad bets by buying bad equities and forcing the people to do it? We're looking at Workers of the World Unite 2.0. There's going to be a huge global backlash from the working people who are now being forced with, quote, austerity measures. They put these austerity clauses in these bailout packages from the IMF and others. How about insanity clauses? Oh, yeah, take the money from the people whose earnings and income have been going down for years. Now they're losing their pensions and benefits. Oh, and by the way, Lou, let's tax them some more, just to rub the salt in the wound a little bit, you know? Don't give them a break. So they're being forced, and now, of course, the EU is doing exactly what the Federal Reserve has done. They're picking up the bad paper from the banks that have made the bad bets, and they're forcing the people to pay them off. So, yeah, the UK is next, Spain is next, Ireland is next. We're seeing what's happening in Hungary, the Ukraine, and by the way, a name that no one ever pays any attention to in the U.S., that isn't making the news hardly at all, is what's going on in Kyrgyzstan. There's a revolution going on, a civil war. And the importance of that, of course, is that's where the U.S. has their military base that brings the supplies into Afghanistan. Oh, and by the way, Lou, they just announced in the New York Times they found very rich mineral deposits throughout Afghanistan. What a surprise. I had no idea. I thought they were there to find Osama bin Laden. 9 years later and $1 trillion spent. They couldn't find the guy? Oh, now he's in Iran, I hear. And of course, if you read our last Trends Journal, we said that's precisely why the United States is there. Because of the rich mineral deposits, and also, of course, the oil pipelines and the rare earth minerals that are now being mined by the Chinese, by the way, that are already making deals.
Gerald, of course, the average American really, if they think about why the U.S. is in these wars, can't understand them. But people are making money out of them, as you've just pointed out, as far as the mineral deposits and that sort of thing. There's vast money to be made by the what used to be called the merchants of death, the military-industrial complex. If you look at what's happened in Europe as well as, of course, the United States, one might almost think that the banks run the world. I mean, there's how many trillions of dollars have governments poured into the banks in order to protect them? And there's no controversy about it. There's no discussion, except among, of course, thanks to you, among regular people. But in the national media, there's no discussion of this. It's just assumed that, of course, the average guy should be ripped off so that Wall Street and the banks can continue to live at the style to which they've become accustomed.
Well, you've mentioned it about the banks, and you may have heard me say it before. It is the banks. I've narrowed it down to 6 simple words so everyone could understand what's going on. Harvard, Princeton, Yale, bullets, bombs, and banks. Look at the Supreme Court. What am I, a moron? Who do they think? Everybody's stupid out there? They have it from Harvard and Yale? Don't tell me how bright and brilliant they are. I don't want to hear it anymore. They put on one shoe at a time like the rest of us. The only reason they have what they have is the skids have been greased for them by Daddy. Listen, George Bush would be lucky to have a job at Walmart's if it wasn't for his old man. And you go down the line like that. The way you get up to the top in politics is just suck your way up to the top. The worst job, Lou, I've ever had was I was involved in politics. I ran a campaign, mayoral campaign out of Yonkers at a graduate school in the early 1970s, worked in Westchester politics, and then they sent me up to Albany. And I was the assistant to the secretary of the New York State Senate. The worst job I ever had, watching grown men grovel all day long. And that's all it is. It's a racket. And the people that they're looking up to, the Hillary Clintons, the Obamas, the Pelosi's, the Bonds, the Bonners. These are the people in high school and college that you couldn't stand. The ones that wanted to be the class president and the student council heads. And here they are. They followed their career path. They sucked their way up to the top. They gland hand. They brown nose. They're totally insincere, and they're only looking out for themselves. What has happened to this country? Every time I see Hillary Clinton or this one or that one, secretary of whatever, go over to a foreign country, or the president, they go in airplanes that could move an entire city. They arrive, they wave down the gangplank, they roll out the red carpet, and they strike up a band. Who are these people? And I don't want to pay for it.
Gerald, tell us about this world war that's coming, what you think the economic and social consequences of it are going to be, and also maybe how it's going to break out.
Well, the way it's going to break out is when all else fails, they take you to war. So after they've tried all their schemes, it's history repeating itself, just has different names in different times. You go back to the 1920s. We have the crash of 29. We have some false recoveries. The world goes into a Great Depression, and war follows. And what we're seeing now is the same scenario. After they fail with the bailouts, the stimulus money runs out, and it's running out worldwide. Let's remember that the United States lent and guaranteed the too big to fails and their other buddies over $13 trillion since the equity markets began to plummet in 2008 and the bankruptcies and collapse happened. So now that's running out. It's going to run out in Europe. They're already in trouble and they're re-stimulating again. The Chinese, they can't dump more money in because they're overstimulating their economy. And the same with India. Inflation is running sky high, and they have to slow down. So now we're also looking, as I mentioned, what's going on in the world as you see the civil unrest starting to happen. Riots in the streets in Greece, civil war in Kyrgyzstan, Ukraine ready to break in two now that a Russian, a new prime minister that has sympathies with the East rather than the West. We're going to start seeing more difficulties there as their economy also unravels. Romania, Bulgaria, riots in Spain, Portugal are going to follow. Ireland, we've already seen some disturbances. The UK and the US next. You're going to see social unrest around the world. As the social unrest grows, the governments, in fear of losing control over the people, start putting more and more draconian measures on them. And to get the people's minds off the internal unrest, they start a war with someone else. This has been going on for centuries. And we see Iran being the flashpoint, the country that everybody loves to hate in the U.S. Why, I don't know. It's ironic, Lew, as we speak, the people that have created the worst environmental disaster in United States history, British Petroleum, hey, isn't that the same group that overthrew Mossadegh with the help of the United States, the Iranian prime minister, in 1953? Because Iran had the nerve to want to own their own oil. Could you imagine that? And then they installed the Shah in there. And the Shah, of course, was this brutal dictator. Most Americans don't have the history down of the Savak, the secret police. They were second only to the SS. So, of course, they overthrew the Shah after time. And now the United States, of course, they're expanding the war into Pakistan. I love it. Their white shoe boy language, these swivel chair generals and commanders and chiefs, commanders and chumps who come up with these lines, AFPAC strategy. What strategy? They have no strategy. They're sending predator drones into sovereign countries. It's called extrajudicial killings, and this is why we have Pakistanis, over 200,000 strong in the U.S., many of them wanting to get even with the United States, to the expanded war over there. And then we have Israel. And you can't say anything bad about Israel without being called an anti-Semite. I don't want to hear it. I'm not an anti-Semite. Most of the people that work at the Trends Research Institute are Jewish. John West, the executive editor of the Trends Journal. Jerry Charles, Laura Martin, Zeke West. One after another, we the place is loaded with Jewish people. I'm not an anti-Semite. Just as I speak about the United States, I can speak about Israel. You cannot break international law. They're not above it, and they continue to do it. They've done it over 60 times. So now we're going to see, we fear either Israel or the United States begin a war with Iran or Israel going back into Lebanon, clamping down more on the Palestinians, where they're going to make it a do or die, a Masada situation, if you will, where it's going to be a do or die. It's going to be, they're going to either commit mass suicide or do everything they can to fight back because the conditions there are so terrible. So we're looking at the beginning of World War III as the world economies collapse. We're calling it the first great war of the 21st century.
You know, Gerald, it's interesting when you bring up the Shah and his vicious secret police that were, I think one of the key things why he was overthrown was that he had a very inflationary monetary policy. He, of course, was spending huge amounts on weapons. He put on price and wage controls, and then he would punish with a particular form of beating any businessman or small businessman who raised his prices. What they would do, they'd take them into the middle of the marketplace and they would beat the bottom of their feet off with bamboo poles, of course, crippling them, and that was the end of them as far as being able to walk. So people resented that, needless to say, and the Shah was a very, very brutal guy. And you're exactly right. He was installed by sort of a BP-CIA alliance, and of course also MI6, the British intelligence operation. So, you know, the big boys are all together. As you pointed out, they're going into Iran, and they want the oil in Iran. They want to also control Iran. But we don't know how will Iran respond. The U.S. seems to me to have the attitude that Genghis Khan would express, that it was actually a violation of your duty to the gods, Genghis Khan said, to resist him because the gods had given him the whole earth as his possession. And it seems like the guys in Washington and all their friends in the oligarchy seem to have that attitude. So if any country seeks to defend itself against U.S. or any of its satellite aggression, this is itself a crime and further reason to kill them all.
Well, look at the language that they use. I read the newspapers, and it's written for children to understand. The United States strategy in Afghanistan is to win over the population. What win over the population? You're an invader. You're an occupying force. Win over what? Win over whom? It doesn't happen. And as you point out, this keeps going on with the military-industrial complex. Anybody that thinks they're going to beat the Persians, the Iranians, doesn't know the first thing about life. They've been around a long time, and they're not going anywhere. The United States, of course, waged a war against them. Jimmy Carter's payback after being humiliated by the Shah's being thrown out began the Iraq War, the Iraq-Iranian War. Remember, later on, Donald Rumsfeld giving Saddam Hussein those golden spurs to keep the war going. Went on for 8 years. The Iranians lost nearly 1 million people and didn't give up 1 inch of ground. Anybody that invades Iran begins World War III. And let's not forget the great quotes from the greatest people, the military people that this country's ever known. Not these so-called military leaders that, push their buttons up to the top, but people like Eisenhower, with a 2-term Republican president, Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces, 5-star general, warning the American people of the military-industrial complex, robbing the country of the genius of its scientists, the sweat of its labors, and the future of its children. How about Smedley Butler, the most decorated Marine in history until he died in 1940s, calling war a racket? And that's all it is. It's a racket. And they use our poor patriotic young men. Your kids, they don't know any better. Who knows what you're doing when you're 18, 19, 20-something years old? You're a kid. You believe this stuff. It sounds good. The guns and, video games and, they're kids. They don't know any better, and they believe what they're being told. Remember the Maine. Hey, how about the Gulf of Tonkin? And Lou, Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda, and the next smoking gun you see may be a mushroom cloud.
You think a mushroom cloud here in this country? You think the U.S. or Israel will use nuclear weapons against Iran?
Anyone that uses a nuclear weapon begins the mass annihilation of the earth. And it's, you don't even need nuclear weapons. We have so many weapons of mass destruction worldwide. One of my books, Trends 2000, I wrote it in the mid-90s. It was about it begins with the breakup of the former Soviet Union, Lou, and all of the weapons of mass destruction that were being sold on the black market. If you read the news and you found it in foreign newspapers, it was one after another. We don't need even nuclear. Anybody that starts a war is going to start the end of life as we know it today. It'll be cataclysmic. They can't control an oil spill in the Gulf. Could you imagine biological warfare being spread worldwide? Hey, but don't worry, Lou. Janet Napolitano, the head of Homeland Security, is on the job. Yeah, she runs up a flight of stairs, we're lucky, without her having a heart attack. She's going to save us. It's out of control if World War III begins.
Gerald Celente, I can't thank you enough for coming on today. I can't thank you enough for the work you do. And I want to urge everybody to take a look at the Trends Research Journal. Take a look at trendsresearch.com. Gerald is the founder and the director of the Trends Research Institute. Gerald Celente, you're definitely a breath of fresh air and a breath of truth for the American people, and thanks for everything you're doing.
Oh, thank you, Lou, for all you're doing, and thanks for having me on your show. I'm honored.
You've been listening to The Lew Rockwell Show, produced by LewRockwell.com, the best-read libertarian website in the world. If you'd like to advertise on this podcast or on the website, email advertising LewRockwell.com. And thanks for listening.